This is a very, very big week for the president. He's hosting a hugely important NATO summit in D.C., while at the same time clearly making the case that he is all in on this race. Put into perspective this week.
Well, I think you kind of laid it out, and Gabe did as well. The president has a series of tests that he needs to pass. The first two, I don't know if we have grades yet, and those being the House conference that took place earlier, the caucus that took place this morning, and the Senate caucus. I would say the rest of the NATO summit, the public parts in the next 24, 48 hours are important. But really the big moment is that Thursday evening press conference. And so what we saw happen, it was maybe clear in the Senate today, and Leanne might have some sort of insight on this as well. But the Senate basically said they didn't reach a verdict on Joe Biden. They basically said we need more time. They're in an impasse. Now, since that, we've learned, since they all met, we've learned that at least 3 senators, including 2 very vulnerable ones, Senator Brown from Ohio and Senator Tester from Montana, they're saying Joe Biden can't win. And then Michael Bennet, senator from Colorado, went on CNN and said the same thing publicly. That's the first senator to say something publicly that damning, and I think it's significant, but there's still a lot more time left in this game.
Leanne, what are you hearing about these meetings on the Hill today with Democrats?
Well, first, what we're hearing is a whole lot less than we were hearing about these phone calls that Hakeem Jeffries, the Democratic leader, was having with members over the weekend. And that's because there were so many leaks from that meeting. So there's been an attempt by Democratic members to really clamp down on what is being discussed. And I'm told that members are actually scared. Some of them are nervous about saying amongst their colleagues what they think privately or in small groups. But what's interesting is that it seems like that even though, as Hans just mentioned, Senator Bennet, what he said publicly just a few moments ago, and Tester and Brown privately in this hearing, that there seems to be this acceptance and acknowledgement that that they might not be able to do anything about Biden at the top of the ticket. They've come to realize that he is not going to listen to Congress, that he is intent on staying in the race. And the fact that the Congressional Black Caucus came out so strongly in support of President Biden has really made it more difficult for other members who are concerned for Biden to take those concerns seriously. And so people are just waiting on pins and needles. And the fear is that the next shoe is going to drop, that Biden is that he's not going to be able to perform or campaign as effectively as he needs to. And it's going to be too late. And so right now they're just watching. And that Thursday press conference, as Hans said, is going to be extremely critical for members of Congress.
I want to talk about that press conference, but before we get there, Hans, you actually reported today that meeting between Senate Democrats focused more on Donald Trump than it did Joe Biden. Given that, what does that tell you about where things stand right now?
Well, some of that was just a foil, to be perfectly honest. We're talking to senators that came out of the meeting, and we asked them, did you make a decision on Joe Biden? And their response, and that's why I use the word foil, is to say, actually, we should be focused more on Donald Trump. And so that's their way of almost dodging and deflecting the question. So apologies if I didn't write it that clearly. That's what it felt like on the Hill to me, talking to half a dozen senators. And by say talking, I was one of 30 reporters craning to get and to listen to what they've said, because I've never really seen Capitol Hill as intense as it was today. Maybe during impeachment with Trump. It was just a very intense moment on Capitol Hill. So there's just, we need to hear from more senators. Go ahead.
I mean, that's amazing. Just stay with that, though. You haven't seen it this intense since the impeachment?
There were a lot of reporters there. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, I mostly cover the White House, so I'm a bit of a fly-by-night sort of congressional reporter, and I'll come by there on big moments. So the very fact that I was there, Stephanie, meant that it was a big moment. No, I don't mean to make light of it. Leanne would have a better sense of this. It was very crowded today. It was very intense. And there was a sense that Democrats, because there's been so much buildup on what are Democrats going to do. They've been talking. There's been this private bluster in these phone calls that we're intercepting. There's been this big lead up, and then they finally met, and people came out, and a lot of the senators weren't It was the least talkative I've seen senators come out of a Senate caucus in 15, 20 years. Okay, they didn't really talk much.
Wow.
It was only around 4 or 5 o'clock that we started getting these readouts that 3 of them said that Joe Biden can't win, which is a step behind. It's a little bit less intense, a little less harsh than saying Joe Biden shouldn't be the nominee, but it's not so hard to get from Joe Biden can't win to he shouldn't be the nominee. So I think there's a lot more focus on the Senate in the next 24, 48 hours.
Molly, what do you think about all of this? Because while we're talking about this, Democrats don't have their attention and their voices aimed at Donald Trump or something you just wrote about, which was Project 2025.
Yeah, I mean, Project 2025 is a plan to radically remake the federal government, fire government employees, just end the Department of Education, create a structure in which you can, use the Comstock Act to end the mailing of mifepristone. I mean, it is seismic. It is enormous. It will change our country in ways we cannot even fathom. It is, I just did a YouTube series on it and interviewed a bunch of historians, and one after the other was a gasp. I mean, it is the beginning of a Christian nation. It is the beginning of Christian nationalism in this country and the end of the American experiment in ways that are, just profound and serious. I mean, it will be seismic, and it will change this country in ways we can't even imagine so far. And it's humongous.
Molly, let's go back to President Biden, because some of his best surrogates are his current campaign managers, Gina Raimondo, Pete Buttigieg, Jennifer Granholm, and they're out there on the trail day in and day out. And they're his cabinet members, right? How important is it for the Biden campaign to remind Americans of the great team they will be getting again versus Donald Trump, who we have absolutely no idea who he'll be choosing? It could be a Marjorie Taylor Greene, Matt Gaetz, Lauren Boebert trifecta cabinet.
Well, one of the scariest things is that the person who wrote the first chapter, Kevin Roberts, who is the president of the Heritage Foundation, he wrote the introduction. He's actually being talked about as Trump's chief of staff, right? I mean, in fact, it's not like the first Trump term, because the first Trump term was disorganized and was filled with sort of hobbyists. This term is filled with maniacal, organized, very intelligent, sort of the think tank, the far right think tank crowd, the Stephen Millers, and they have a plan that is going to be implemented on day one. So the difference between Biden world, where you have, normal politicians, you have senators and governors and people like Jennifer Granholm who have worked in the federal government, versus this sort of these are the very kind of fringe far right people who have taken over the Heritage Foundation and who have created this sort of just add Donald Trump government that they plan to start if he wins in January.
Hans, let's go back to this NATO summit, because it's not just important because of what's going on at home. Ukraine will be a huge topic. And just yesterday, a Russian missile attack on Ukraine's biggest children's hospital killed 2 adults. It wounded 7 kids, and it put the hospital out of commission. How important is it to keep the spotlight on Ukraine during this summit?
Well, that's clearly the goal of the president, and he wants to show solidarity. And in that sort of, we talk about some of his challenges domestically, but internationally, he does have a great deal of support from his leaders in NATO and G7 countries. And that's something that he'll look to tout and sort of highlight throughout the week, that his alliance-based approach to diplomacy and international affairs pays dividends and keeps Americans safe. So that's something that the president absolutely wants to talk about, and he's very comfortable talking about it, and it's very core and essential to his very being.
Leanne, you and Hans both mentioned it earlier, how important this press conference is on Thursday at the summit. Tell us what to expect.
Well, what Democrats hope happens is that President Biden kicks it out of the park. The fact that he is sharp and witty and reminiscent of his old self, even if he does go off on tangents, the fact that he can answer questions sharply. And also what's getting lost in this is one thing that's frustrating Democrats is that they're concerned that Biden, not about his ability to be president, but about his ability to deliver a message against Donald Trump when that is essential in a presidential campaign. I was speaking with some progressive aides today who said, yes, his debate performance was a disaster, but it was a disaster because he wasn't telling a story. He wasn't giving a vision of the country. He wasn't giving a vision for his next 4 years. And so Democrats are not only going to want a smooth delivery and one where he is on top of it, but also they want to hear clarity. They want to hear Democratic priorities and Democratic values. And so the question is if President Biden is going to be able to deliver on that.
Even though the Supreme Court's immunity ruling means Donald Trump's 2020 election case will not come to trial anytime soon, special counsel Jack Smith may still have a chance to present some of his evidence. But the former president is reportedly trying to prevent even that from happening. For more, I want to bring in Hugo Lowell, political investigations reporter for The Guardian, and Andrew Weissman, former FBI general counsel and former senior member of the Mueller probe. Lucky us, he's also an MSNBC legal analyst and a law professor at NYU. Hugo, you must go first. Why? Because you broke this story. What do we need to know?
Look, Trump well knows that the potential evidence that could come out of hearings in the summer could be really damaging, especially before the election. And the one thing that the Trump campaign has polled is the January 6th case polls badly. They see that that was their most damaging case politically. And so in many ways, they're determined to avoid that evidence from becoming public. And so what the Trump lawyers seem to have settled on in terms of their strategy to avoid it is twofold, as we reported. One is to basically argue to Judge Chutkan, the presiding trial judge in the DC case, that she doesn't have to hold hearings at all, and that this could be resolved on legal argument and through briefings. And then if that fails and the special counsel pushes for witnesses, people like Mike Pence, Trump's strategy is then to basically litigate his way through and delay it until after the election. And that will look like executive privilege fights. It will look like trying to get Pence to assert speech or debate clause protection, and then getting other people who are connected to this case, people like John Eastman and people like Mike Roman, who have been charged in Fulton County, to say that their Fifth Amendment concerns and couldn't possibly testify as to whether, Trump was acting as candidate Trump in a particular instance leading up to January 6th, or if he was acting as President Trump. And of course, the aim is to prevent prosecutors from being able to make that argument, because it's up to prosecutors to show Judge Chutkan that the presumptive immunity for any official acts can be overcome.
But Andrew, how's he going to do that? How's he going to honestly challenge testimony from key witnesses like his former VP? What's the legal argument for that?
Well, I think what he's going to try to do is basically not have the hearing. I mean, the worst possible thing for him is essentially a mini trial, as Hugo said. The problem, Stephanie, is that the Supreme Court decision, as horrendous and untethered and unprincipled as it is, does say that Judge Chutkan should hold a factual hearing and says the inquiry is fact specific and gives lots of examples of what needs to be determined factually. Well, a factual hearing cannot be decided on the papers. It's something where the government's going to say it is entitled to present witnesses to show why this is appropriate to consider for trial, and it satisfies the various tests that Supreme Court has laid out. And then I also think the issue of executive privilege, which is sort of a fallback argument. I mean, I don't fault Donald Trump's counsel for making the argument, but that's already been litigated with respect to numerous people. Mike Pence, for instance, as the reporting is, has already testified in the grand jury. So the issue of executive privilege is come and gone. So this is going to be, I think, a bit of an uphill battle for Donald Trump. But it's also, really notable that he obviously does not want the facts to come out. I mean, if you thought the facts were going to be good for you, you wouldn't be objecting so strenuously to having this kind of pretrial hearing.
But we can't be surprised, right? Any hearing is not going to be good for Donald Trump, and successfully and blocking or delaying has been a huge success for him thus far, Andrew. So wouldn't it make perfect sense that he would go this way?
Absolutely. I mean, this is, delay is absolutely the thing to do. But this is one where the language of the Supreme Court case is very much against Donald Trump's position in terms of having a factual hearing. And again, I do think that this, plays, I think, into Joe Biden's hands to say, what are you hiding? In other words, why do you not want to have a hearing where people who are, just remember, these witnesses are going to be Republican witnesses who are all part of his administration, whether it's all the way up to Mike Pence or whether it's counsel in the White House who worked for Donald Trump. That's the kind of information that can now be presented. And so, again, I'm not surprised that he's making these arguments, but I do think it's an uphill battle.
Republican witnesses, almost reminiscent of the January 6th hearings. Hugo, do you expect to see Trump use this new strategy in the documents case in Georgia?
Yeah, I think for sure in the documents case, difficult to say about Georgia, but in the documents case, they are already filing briefs saying that Judge Chutkan should accept supplemental authority on several points in light of the Supreme Court decision. Notably, the one thing they're really looking at is Clarence Thomas's line about whether Jack Smith was even lawfully appointed because the special counsel was in Trump's eyes not lawfully appointed by statute. And we went through this argument at a hearing in Fort Pierce earlier, several weeks ago. And Judge Cannon at that point, tried to suggest that actually Trump's argument was a loser. But because of the Supreme Court decision and because of Clarence Thomas's line that he is not sure that Jack Smith was properly appointed, Trump's lawyers have already seized on this. We've already got some of the deadlines frozen in the documents case as she now considers the implications of the SCOTUS decision.
Andrew, I am not letting you leave until we at least touch this other topic. Democrats are now trying to focus voters' attention on Project 2025. We've been talking about it for months. This thing could mean radical changes for the Justice Department and give the president more control than ever. What should we know?
I think one of the things to know is that there is a norm in the Justice Department that it does not take direct orders as to who to prosecute and who not to prosecute from the President of the United States, meaning that in a democratic system, it's really important that you don't have a president saying things like, just go after Democrats or just go after Republicans. And you see Merrick Garland actually going after Republicans and Democrats. There's a sitting U.S. senator who is on trial right now here in Manhattan. And it really is sort of the road to autocracy if you have a Justice Department that is just a handmaiden to politics. And part of the Donald Trump playbook is to do just that. And this is one where you don't have to be worried, be sort of predictive. It's something that he did under Attorney General Bill Barr, and I think it's only going to be worse under Project 2025. And it's really something that is anathema to anyone who believes in the rule of law.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.